Hey guys, Helena here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to my home gym. Today what I'm going to do is go through the deadlift with you. So the deadlift is an exercise which I used to be petrified of and now I love, and that is because I have developed my understanding of the exercise and how to perform it safely and in a manner that will actually protect my body against injury. The amount of times that people hurt themselves bending down to pick up the remote off the floor or something simple like that, or getting out of a chair, quite often is due to weaknesses which, if they were training deadlift correctly, they would actually be able to prevent those sorts of injuries. So setting it clear, the deadlift is not inherently unsafe. However, technique is really important. If you haven't directly been coached on the deadlift before itself, there's a really good chance that you're making some of these common errors, and they are quite easy to fix once you're aware of them. Nothing is easy to fix if you don't know that it's a problem. So we're going to go through those first. What are some of the things we get wrong, and then some cues to take you through so that you know that your setup is correct before you start, and a couple of things to think about throughout the lift to make sure that you are staying on track with your movement. Let's go. So I really encourage people to film their lifts. Not necessarily even just the big ones, because quite often you can find that you're doing little things that you didn't feel like you were doing in your exercise. The video can be so powerful to help you pick up. Once you see it on video, you can feel it, and then you can start working towards feeling what it feels like to not make that error. So it's really, really powerful, and I encourage everybody to film their lifts as much as possible. One common mistake which can lead to injury is jerking the bar off the ground. And to avoid that, what we want to do is pull the slack out of the bar before we start. So before you lift, you want to be set and hear the click of the bar tension being applied. There is always some space between the bar and the plates, and if you pull with your hardest force, that needs to be taken there before it will lift up, and that jerk can sometimes be the thing that leads to that sharp little injury in the low back. So lock into place, pull out the slack. One thing to keep your eye out for is bar path. So if you're filming your lifts, you're going to be able to see this. This also applies to your squat. When I say bar path, I literally mean the path that your bar is taking. So you want this to be moving in a straight line on the way up and on the way down. If it's veering away from you, or the bar is taking a curved path at any point, there is a good sign that something is not on or something is overworking. If at any point the bar swings away from you, your lats aren't on. If your lats aren't on, your spine isn't protected. What you want to be doing is locking those lats on the entire lift. Doing some lat activation before you start deadlifts is a really good idea, whether that be something like on a lat pull down or with some resistance bands, but really getting those so you can feel them locked on and down. Another very common error to be looking out for is rounding of the back throughout the lift. A good way to think about this that's going to help prevent that is to think of your ribcage and your pelvis as like one solid piece. There can't be any break. It is one solid stacked unit. Another common error is turning your deadlift into a squat. Anyone who's more quad dominant and potentially weak in their glutes may have a tendency to want to turn their deadlift into a squat. And what I mean by that is changing it from being a hip dominant movement to being a knee dominant movement. Turning into a squat by bending their knees too early. The cue here is to hinge hips back until the bar gets past your knees, then you can start to bend them. Keep the knees stiff until the bar has passed them on the way down. One more very common error in the deadlift is right at the very top, and that is overextending at the top. This often happens when we have a little bit of a disconnect on how to contract our glute muscles and using our lumbar spine to try and force that movement. It looks like this. What we want to be doing is locking into the top position with a contraction of the glutes, but not with a push through of the glutes. Your pelvis should not end up in front of your chest. So setting up for a conventional deadlift, you may be wondering where actually to put your feet. How close do they need to be? This is how far apart. If you're trying to work out where to find this stance, a good way to do it is to imagine that you're about to do the highest jump that you can. You might want to do a few practice jumps. Where do your feet go right before you jump? That position there, if that's where you felt like you were going to do your best jump from, then is very likely your best position to push away from the floor from. As we walk up to the bar, we want to be setting that bar up over our midfoot. And when I say midfoot, that's including your heel. It's usually about an inch away from your shins. If the bar is too close to your shins, you're not going to be in the right position. Once you bend down, you're going to have to roll that bar forward. If you're wanting to look down and check that the bar is over your midfoot, but you have large breasts or a large stomach, that means you would have to lean back to be able to see that. The best way to do that, if you have anything obstructing your view, is to look from the side. So we've worked out how wide we want our stance to start with, and we've got the bar set over our midfoot about an inch away from our shins. The next step is to be able to grab the bar. You could grip with a mixed grip, which is preferable for most, or if you're just starting and you wanted to start out with 2 hands overhand just so everything feels really even, that's a good option as well. Now the strongest position for your arms is straight down from your body. You may find, as a woman in particular, that grabbing straight down gets in the way of your hips. We want our hips to be the priority here, and so as a woman, if you have narrow shoulders in comparison to your hips, you may find that you are grabbing slightly wider. Now in the deadlift, your arms are acting like hooks. Imagine you don't have an elbow, this is literally just a long hook grabbing onto the bar for you. And so that hook needs to be running pretty much straight down. When you are setting up for this, what you want to be doing is having the bar directly under your armpit. So having the bar under your armpit, and how far down you sit your squat is the next question that will usually come up. So if you've got your arms grabbed on, your bar is in the right position, sink your bottom down and back basically until your shins touch the bar. You'll often notice that people start with a really low position, and that all comes up before the bar ever leaves. The bar will only leave the ground, particularly if it's heavy, once you're in the correct position. So if you're finding that your hips are lifting for a while before the bar leaves, start off in a higher position. The mistake that people make here, which makes them lose mid-back tension or potentially never achieve the right amount of back tension, is mistakenly thinking that this part should be comfortable. When you have full tension through your lats in the bottom of a deadlift position, it shouldn't be comfortable. A position down the bottom has so much tension because what you're trying to do is create enough tension and rigidity that when you have that force pulling up off the ground, that you don't bend, you don't break. If your torso is solid because you created this tension, you will not get injured. So we're down in position, we've squeezed, we are feeling uncomfortable at the bottom, we've got our knees jammed out against our elbows as well as our shoulder blades pulled down of our back. Our crown of our head is heading towards the ceiling, and from there what we do is we don't think about a pull. We think about doing a leg press away, so we leg press to get the bar started and then a hip thrust or a pull movement from the top. The deadlift is not actually just a pull movement, it's a push and a pull together. So we do that, we leg press the floor away to get us started, and then once the bar gets past our knees, then the pull movement starts. One more cue, and something that I get questions about a lot, is where to breathe and how to use your breathing within the deadlift as well. So your breath is a great injury prevention tool because it helps create a whole lot of tension from the inside pressing outwards, so that your breath, you want to be breathing in deeply, so it's sitting in your core and pressing against the inside of your spine. And that's how I visualize my breath in my deadlift. So I breathe in and I'm creating, pushing outwards with that breath so that my spine can't move. It's not at any risk of bending in or collapsing under the load. So we're locked into position at the bottom, chest up, our crown of our head is ready to head towards the ceiling, our shoulder blades are pulled down. We take a big breath in to push that air inside against the inside of our spine to support it. So a lot of those same principles apply for sumo stance. Obviously the stance itself is a little bit different, so we can go through that now too. So with your sumo stance, essentially the goal is to have your feet as wide as you can while still being able to maintain a vertical shin. With sumo, you don't have to worry as much about having the bar away from your shins because your feet are going to be on about a 45-degree angle. When you bend down, your shin is not moving forward, so you're not at risk of moving the bar away. With that being the general rule on stance, it's going to be different for a lot of people. Some people might find that very uncomfortable. Flexibility and mobility are going to come into this as well. With hands in this position, we go back to the general rule that you are strongest with arms straight down, locking those hooks on. A lot of everything else becomes the same. So make sure the hooks are there. We drop our hips down and push a little bit of pressure into the bar. Scapula down, chest up, head heading towards the roof, and pull. Still initiate with a hinge on the way down, and bend the knees once the bar gets past. So while that's the general rule for the setup for those two stances, it is going to look different on everybody. And for some people, mobility may be a reason why the stance needs to look a little bit different to achieve the same amount of activation. And things like lever length matter as well. If someone's long torso or long or short femur, long or short tibia, it can look very different, and that's one of the reasons why the deadlift is really hard to master. By watching other people doing it, it doesn't always look the same on your body. So understanding these cues and what things should feel like relative to your own body is a good way to be able to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Something else to note about the way that you might see some people performing this lift that might look confusing compared to what you've learned is understanding that there are different applications of this lift. If somebody is a powerlifter, they're not going to be trying to utilize the eccentric or the lowering phase of the deadlift. If somebody is a bodybuilder or training for functional hypertrophy or functional strength, as in strength that you'll be able to use and apply in everyday life, the eccentric component of the deadlift is really important, and you'll see that often done in a slow, controlled state. So a powerlifter will want to pull the bar up and not waste any energy with putting that bar back down, and so they will quite often just drop it from there or pull it down as quickly as possible so that they're not retrieving any feedback from the bar on the way down. That eccentric component has a lot of strength and hypertrophy, and when I say hypertrophy I mean muscle growth potential, and anybody trying to grow a better looking set of glutes or some firmer hamstrings, this is an exercise that's going to be really beneficial for that. Also for the lower back strength and postural benefits that I was speaking about at the beginning, most of that is applied through the eccentric phase, and so it should, in most cases, unless you're training for pure strength, you should be taking advantage of a slow lowering of the deadlift and really paying attention to that hinge pattern. So focusing in just on that hinge pattern right now, this is where the magic happens for growing da booty. So the hips hinge back like a Romanian deadlift. So we're aiming to feel this coming through the backs of our legs and our glutes. And are keeping that tension through the backs of our legs and our glutes as we drop down. If I was a powerlifter, I want that thing down as quickly as possible because I don't want to waste the energy. Something I get asked often about is shoes. So as an all-round shoe, I really like a Metcon. But essentially when it comes to your deadlift and your squat, you want a hard shoe. You want feedback from the floor. You don't want to be wearing a running shoe that's spongy. So you want something that's hard and solid, so you'll often see people in like a Converse or a Metcon or potentially even in bare feet so that you can really have good feedback from the floor. Weightlifting shoes are a very flat sole. Unless you're looking at a squat shoe, which quite often they do have an elevated heel. Not everybody needs that elevated heel. It's to do with mobility, and that will be a conversation for another day, but most of the time you really don't want an elevated heel when it comes to deadlifts. You want to be working with a flat shoe that is solid and is not sponging into the ground. It's really important. That sponginess stops you from being able to have that stable base. Lifting straps can also be very useful, particularly when you're starting with deadlifts. A lot of women in particular find that very quickly when they start to build some strength with the deadlift, that their legs are a lot stronger than their grip, and having Having some assistance for your grip so that you can still challenge your legs while you're building grip strength can be really helpful. So over time you shouldn't need them as much, but it really depends on your rep range and your grip as well. If you happen to be in a snatch grip, which is a wide grip on the bar, that will almost always need some straps, particularly if you're doing more than sort of 2 or 3 reps. I like just your traditional style loop. However, there are the figure 8s or there is the hook style. I would probably advise against hook style for the most part because actually building some grip strength is quite difficult with those. So it's using just enough assistance to be able to help you get through the sets, but still challenge your grip. You should have some sore forearms for the first little while, and that's okay. That strength is a great thing to be building. It's going to help you pull ups if you have goals there, and just having a strong grip in general is really important. Even just as you age, it tends to be one of the first strength areas to go, so starting from a stronger place is a really good place to be. So that just about wraps it up for the deadlift. I hope that was helpful and that you learned something you can take away today. I'd love to know if there was anything in particular that gave you a little bit of an aha moment, or if you take these tips away and try them, if something really clicks for you, that feedback would be so appreciated. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, hit down there. At least once a month I'll be adding a new technique tutorial, as well as I have my exercise library with really quick dot points on being able to get your head around an exercise. So check that one out as well. Talk soon.